Video 34, Moths and Rust. Hey, today I killed a moth hovering over the floor vent in my kitchen sink, under my kitchen sink. And it was a vent that I bought maybe 6 months ago to replace one that was rusting out. And this one is already showing signs of rust because of water splashes on it. And immediately my mind went to scripture, where moth and rust destroy. And I just stood there thinking, how much of my life has been focused on the very things that deteriorate? You know, the house, the appearance, the upgrades, the perfect version of everything, the endless fixing and improving. And none of those things are wrong. But striving has a way of subtly convincing you that if you can just finally get everything right, get it all tidied up and finished, then you'll finally be able to rest and finally feel secure, finally enjoy your life, finally be at ease. But meanwhile, the vent rusts, the flowers bloom and fade, the children grow up, the years pass, and you suddenly realize so much of what consumed your mental and emotional and physical energy was temporary all along. Not meaningless, but temporary. And I think that's part of what God's been showing me lately. Not that beauty doesn't matter. Not that homes and gardens and creative work don't matter. But that they were never meant to be the full weight of my identity or my hope or my peace, because moth and rust still exist. So friend, if you struggle with striving, let's talk about it. And if you're new here, I'm Lisa, and this is Second Peak Midlife. Everything earthly eventually fades, and maybe that's why gratitude matters so much, because instead of desperately trying to preserve and perfect everything, we're invited to just receive it and to enjoy it and to share it and to hold it with open hands. And maybe part of maturity is learning the difference between stewarding beautiful things and worshiping them. And I think that midlife naturally becomes a season of reflection, because by this point, more life is behind you than is ahead of you. And you can finally look back far enough to start to see patterns, choices, fear, grace, the things that you chased, the things you postponed, the things that you missed while trying to build the perfect version of life. And no, this isn't one of those no regrets tattoo speeches. I definitely have regrets. Moments that I wish I had handled differently, years that I wish I had been more present for, friendships that I wish I had nurtured better, and time spent striving instead of receiving. But I also think there's a difference between living trapped by regret and allowing hindsight to soften and teach you, because regret can either make you bitter or it can make you wiser. It could make you more fearful or more grateful. And maybe part of maturity is learning how to grieve what was missed without missing what's still there. Maybe the miracle is finally beginning to see it. A few days ago, I read an essay by local artist Sheila Atchley called "Don't Dream Past Your Life." And I really haven't been able to stop thinking about it. She wrote about a hummingbird that was hovering outside of her studio window, and about how social media constantly tempts us to dream up a better version of the very life we're also standing inside of. And something in me just broke open when I read it, because I realized I've spent so much of my life dreaming past my life. And I would go so far to say even magazines before social media did this. But I was always longing for the real version, the better version, the prettier version, the version where the house is finally done and the garden finally looks right, the finances are stable, the body is fixed, the opportunities are bigger, the friendships are deeper, the creative work is successful, and the timing is perfect. And I always felt like life was just always slightly ahead of me, like I was preparing for my life instead of inhabiting it. And honestly, I think striving just does that to us. Perfectionism does that to us. Coveting does that to us. Fear does that to us. Comparison does it. They say comparison is the thief of joy. You spend so much time trying to get to that idealized version of life that you stop seeing the grace and the miracles that are woven through the actual one. And I think that's part of why Sheila's essay hit me so deeply, because she talked about how the dreams she had in her 20s didn't happen the way that she had imagined. She imagined a mountaintop property with her children living nearby, a beautiful vision, with a gorgeous view. And instead, she ended up in a cul-de-sac in a less than ideal neighborhood. But her grandchildren are next door, playing in the same yard that her daughters once played in. And she realized this was the answered prayer. It just wasn't in the form that she expected. And that struck something really deep in me, because I can suddenly see how many times God has done that in my own life. I prayed for the ability to travel again, that Chris and I could never afford to travel throughout most of our marriage. And I hadn't really traveled since college. And I dreamed about Europe, art retreats, creative life, freedom, beauty, adventure. And I spent years just longing for that kind of life. I mean, years. And I even signed up to become a travel agent at one point, hoping that would help get me there. And I bought courses and art supplies and bought travel opportunities. And I attended Jean Oliver's retreat back in 2016. And through Jean, I was actually introduced by text to Sheila Atchley. And at the time, I was desperate, financially depleted, physically, spiritually depleted. And I was so jealous of Jean's life. The creativity, the beauty, the travel, the freedom. It was just what I had dreamed, and I wanted that life so badly. And I kept desperately trying to bridge that gap. And I joined another multi-level marketing called Chalk Couture, because I thought that would be easier to sell than creating my own art. So I taught classes at a brewery locally here, $30 a person, and I sold my personal artwork on the walls there. And I set up booths with my art and travel opportunities and Chalk Couture products, trying to build that dream. And then one day I went to another show and I saw someone else with this massive Chalk Couture setup, a huge booth, professional, established, all these people crowded around, and immediately my spirit collapsed. And I thought, well, there goes that. They've got the market. How can I compete with that? And I quit. Not because there wasn't room for me, but because I was exhausted and operating from a scarcity mindset. And I can see in hindsight that scarcity mindset has followed me in so many places, always believing that someone else already had the space, someone else was doing it better, someone else was more polished, more talented, more established, more beautiful, more successful. And underneath all of that was this constant feeling of being late for my own life, like my real life hadn't even started yet. And yet, looking back now, I can see something that's just a little bit heartbreaking, because my life was happening the whole time, that I was busy longing for the dream version, and I often missed the beauty of the life that God had actually given me. And even now I catch myself doing it, dreaming of the perfect house and garden instead of making the most of what I already have, longing for more, because somehow it never feels like quite enough. And then Sheila wrote this line, "Don't dream past your one wild and precious life." And honestly, that gave me a lump in my throat, because hindsight is 2020, and I can see now how fear narrowed my life, how striving just blinded me, and how perfection delayed joy, how comparison stole gratitude. And yet at the same exact time, I can also suddenly see God's faithfulness everywhere, because I prayed to travel again, and here I am with a job that literally pays me to travel. Not in the way I imagined, not backpacking freely through Europe as a loose artist in my 20s, but through meaningful life-saving work, and through provision through middle age, through faithfulness. And because of this job, Chris and I have been able to go to all kinds of places. Scottsdale, Vancouver, Napa, all kinds of places, practically for free through hotel points and airline miles. And what do? I complain about the travel. I complain about being tired. I complain about the stress, the delays in airports. And suddenly I realized, Lord, you answered my prayer. And not only answered it, you gave me way more than I asked for. And I almost missed it because I was still holding the answer up against this fantasy version in my head. And that realization just humbled me deeply because it reminded me of the Israelites. You know, God parts the Red Sea and rescues them miraculously. And shortly afterward, they're already complaining about food and water. And I see myself so much in that God provides abundantly. And then I focus on lack again and fear. Not because he failed me, but because as humans, we normalize miracles quickly. And striving always whispers in your ear, yes, but the house still isn't done. Yes, but you're still tired. Yes, but you're still not where you thought you'd be. You're still not gallivanting around Europe. And maybe part of maturity, part of sanctification is learning to recognize grace in its actual form, not the imagined form, but the actual form, the ordinary form, the hummingbird outside the window, the peonies blooming in your own yard, the husband you built a life with, the son you raised, the health restored, the flexibility that I prayed to work from home, and it just didn't happen in the timeline that I thought that it should, when I wanted it to be when I was raising my son. And the answered prayers, though, are disguised as ordinary life. And maybe the path forward now isn't reinvention of self. Maybe it's perseverance and not quitting, not abandoning things every time someone seems a little further ahead, not assuming it's too late, not believing that the space is already taken. Because, Sheila didn't even begin painting seriously until after age 50, and she's just a few years older than me. And somehow that realization just dismantled something inside me, this idea that if it hasn't happened yet, then it's not going to. But no, maybe life is not over. Maybe God still has beauty to unfold, and maybe all these years were not wasted, and all the false starts, the failed attempts, the fear, the exhaustion, the wandering, we're still just a becoming, a messy becoming, a sanctifying becoming. And maybe growth now looks less like chasing some idealized future life and more like finally entering into the life already sitting in front of me, opening the garden gate, inviting someone for coffee, using the good dishes, seeing beauty now and giving thanks now and praising God now, and not waiting for someday when everything is perfect and in my vision but his. And maybe this ordinary life with all its imperfections, all its unfinished edges, all its detours, is the very place where God has been meeting me all along. And maybe the miracle is just finally beginning to see it. Back in 2016, when I attended Jean Oliver's art retreat, one that she had stateside so it was cheaper for me, she asked what book had influenced us the most, and I answered The Hidden Art of Homemaking by Edith Schaefer. And I truly meant it. I loved the ideas of ordinary beauty and creativity and atmosphere in your everyday life. But honestly, I don't think that I fully understood it the way that I'm beginning to now. Because back then, my idea of beauty was still all tangled up with perfection, presentation, control, wanting my home to feel almost like a magazine layout, beautiful but not livable, not very interruptible, not hospitable. And now I feel myself shifting towards something different, and more like Rosaria Butterfield's The Gospel Comes with a House Key. Less focused on impressing and more focused on welcoming. Less, does my home look beautiful enough? And more, do people feel loved here? Because I'm beginning to realize that beauty is not fully alive unless it's shared. The garden isn't just for admiring from a distance. The peonies and iris aren't just for photographing. They're for cutting and putting on the table for someone else to enjoy too. And maybe that's part of what God has been teaching me all along. that the point of beauty is not performance. It's hospitality. It's generosity. It's participation. It's opening that gate, opening the door, opening your hands, even when everything isn't perfect yet. And maybe especially then. And maybe that's part of why stories matter so much. And I think about this often about my husband, because he's been through years of debilitating back pain, hopelessness, trying treatment after treatment, feeling failed by the traditional medical system, and slowly through a series of seemingly disconnected things, alternative treatments, persistence, trial and error, he's getting his life back. And sometimes he gets discouraged and he says, why would anyone want to hear this story? And I always tell him the same thing, because people need hope. People with chronic pain are suffering deeply to the point of despair. And when someone sees another person slowly finding relief, slowly returning to life, it reminds them that they're not trapped forever. Hope matters that much. And I recently realized that I need to start believing that about my own story too, because I think sometimes I still minimize what I have to say. And I think, well, other people are already talking about these things, or my story is not really dramatic or anything, or I still struggle. I don't have it perfect. I don't have it together. But maybe the value is not in having a perfect story. Maybe it's in honestly sharing what God is teaching me through ordinary life, through the striving, through the fear, through the aging, through food and friendship and regret and gratitude and beauty and repentance and perseverance. Because maybe people don't need another polished expert. Maybe they just need hope. Hope that it's not too late, that growth is still possible, that God still transforms people. Gratitude can be relearned. Relationships can still deepen. Beauty can still be cultivated. Joy can still return. Prayers can be answered in unexpected ways. And maybe that's part of why I'm sharing any of this at all. Not because I've mastered life, but because I can finally see that God has been faithful to me in the middle of it the entire time. And if He can patiently transform someone like me, then maybe that can give someone else hope too. Thanks for spending time here today with me. And if this helped you, please tell me about it in the comments and like and share this video.